And we are live. Welcome to this edition of Real Talk, brought to you by the Vic Masters and the Over 35s Rugby Alliance. First, before we start, just want to acknowledge where you are right now, wherever your feet are on this space right now. We acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and where we stand right now. We're thankful for the nurture and care of the land for thousands of years, and we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are here today. And no mai haere mai e te tātou whānau no Aotearoa. We welcome our rugby family that are joining in from New Zealand and the land that my roots lie. So here we are with another edition of Real Talk, which is on a very special day. It's on the Are You OK Day. So the Are You OK Day is really about us all reaching out to each other, staying connected and checking in and making sure that we're okay. I can't stress this enough. There's nothing wrong to put your hand up and say, I'm not okay, and to ask for help, because the thing that's happening in the moment is we can't do anything that we would normally be doing. And these are unprecedented and challenging times. So the more we look out for each other, the more we support each other, it's stuff we need to do all the time. And also, we're writing the playbook as we go through this. So we're all learning as we go along. And since we can't play the game that we love and we're all starving for content, we thought we'd bring back the real talk. So my name is Brendan. I'm the president of the Vic Masters, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Carl Ramage, the vice president of the Vic Masters. G'day, Carl.
G'day, mate. How are you? Are you okay?
I'm tired. I am so tired. I'm sick and tired of this. I'm sick and tired of these four walls that have been locked away in for 220 odd days. Just want to get out and have face-to-face and play rugby and do all the stuff that we would normally be doing. What about yourself?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. You feel a bit trapped inside and want to get out and play a bit of rugby and actually just have a beer and chew the fat with a few of my rugby mates. But maybe we'll try and do a bit of that with these guys.
Yeah,
how they're coping.
They don't want to see me. So with that, I'm going to bring in and I'll let you do the introductions.
No worries. Thanks, Brendan. G'day, Morgs. G'day, Mehrtens. How are you?
Evening, guys.
Yeah, good. Welcome, mate. Thanks for joining us for Real Talk. I guess we'll start with a bit of a disclaimer so that you can feel a bit comfortable. Any views or comments that you might make during the evening, Chatham House rules, full disclaimer, it doesn't represent perhaps the views of your employer or any of the businesses that we might be associated with. So let's just crack on and have a relaxing evening. To the audience, welcome. My name's Carl. As Brendan said, I'm the vice president of Vic Masters. I want to extend a warm welcome to the Vic Masters family and to our brothers and sisters in the other states through the Over 35s Rugby Alliance and all of our Kiwi mates that have tuned in and others around Asia that I know that are listening in tonight. A big shout out to you. As Brendan said, today in Australia is Are You OK Day. I really do hope that wherever you are, that you are okay, you and your family are safe and well. Morgs, it's great to have you on the Real Talk. Are you okay?
I'm all right, thank you. Thanks for asking. It's a special day. It obviously started with a special place that means a lot to me. It was a family at Waverley College, actually. Went through a tough time there, and so my sons are both there. So it's a really important day in our local area. Mehrtens is down the road as well. So, I think we're a bit better than we used to be about asking questions of each other and making sure our mates are okay, but we've got a long way to go. So days like today, if it gives us an excuse to maybe start those conversations, that's great.
And so what do you do to wind down and to get away from this two-dimensional world that we've sort of landed in over the last 2 years?
Yeah, truthfully, so my poor family, we did the lockdown last year in Melbourne, and now they're in the middle of the Sydney one, so they've had the double of everyone. I know Victoria's part of it again, but this time around, we got the salt water, which I grew up at Clovelly on the beach, and I think it took me to be away from it to really realise how important it was as part of my life. Even when you don't go in it, driving past, walking past, knowing it's there, just has a really centering, calming effect on me and my family, my kids as well. So we're really thankful that, our 5K radius, we probably lose half of it within that circle to the Pacific Ocean, but we're pretty lucky that being able to jump in the water, being able to see the sunrise over the water, be able to walk along the water has made this one a little bit easier than doing laps of Wattle Park is what we were doing this time last year.
No, I understand that, and Wattle Park's a bit lumpy with lots of roots, but that smell of the sea air, it is quite calming. I grew up by the beach as well. I understand that. You've got 4 kids, homeschooling. How's that going for you?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, teachers have got it easy, I reckon, because they only ever have to teach one age group and one subject at a time. We've got Year 10 maths, we've got Year 5 science, we've got Year 6 and a Year 7, all that. So we've got Shakespeare in Year 7, a Midsummer Night's Dream happening. So we've got all that happening in the house. My wife's a teacher, so she's on site at the moment. So I'm trying to plan as many meetings as I can, which means the kids have to do their own education. I'm okay with the Year 5 and 6 stuff, but the Year 10 maths, trying to remember sine, cos and tan's been challenging.
Yeah, I had to do a bit of that myself, and I must admit I got the angles wrong, but there's nothing different there. Look, you've just looking through a list of some of your career, and I'm going to read out a few of them. It's pretty impressive, I mean, you're obviously associated with and have played with the Randwick Club and still have quite a bit to do with that. You captained the Australian schoolboys. You played under 21s for Aussie Australian Sevens. Did you sign that one for Mehrtens? Is that the jersey that you've got, Mehrtens, the Sevens one?
Well, it probably is, because it's probably one of the few ones that might fit him, because they're pretty tight fitting, the Sevens jerseys these days.
And then in Super Rugby, you had stints with Waratahs, but also with the Reds. And then, like a lot of rugby players, went overseas and spent some time playing in France. You had a coaching stint with the Rebels, and maybe we won't talk about that, but we might leave that there. Currently general manager of the Classic Wallabies, and you're heavily involved with the Better Challenge, the Owen Finnegan's charity, and now with Stan Sports. It's quite a list. I think for me, being a Kiwi living in Australia, and what you're doing with Stan more recently, you're starting to become a bit of a leading voice for rugby, and you're fairly highly regarded with some of the insights and analysis that you're bringing to the game. Hopefully tonight doesn't change that opinion. But looking back, what are some of the highlights and standouts of your career that when you sit there and reflect when you're walking along the beach, what comes to mind that sort of gives you a bit of satisfaction and out of what you've been able to do?
Yeah, no, thanks. You're very kind. Look, it's going to sound impressive until you go onto the next person's CV. It's going to be, mine's not going to look that good when you go on to Mehrtens next. But look, I was very lucky to have played in good teams right the way through. I was lucky. The accent of geography had a Maori father who left Hamilton at 19. He was pretty smart, wasn't he? He went straight to Bondi, as many of him and his mates did. And mum's Aussie, met mum over here. So I grew up geographically in a great place for rugby. It's a story I tell a lot, but, my parents took me out of year 1 class at St Anthony's in Clovelly to go and watch the All Blacks play Randwick at Coogee Oval. They thought that was much more important for my education than anything I could learn at school. And so I was always going to play rugby. And then lucky enough to be in an area with Randwick and on a Saturday afternoon, I'd played my rugby in the morning and you're sitting in front of the scoreboard with your mates, Steve Hoyles, guys like that, would sit in front of the scoreboard and watch Campese and Knox and all these great players play, and that was our Saturday afternoon. So we didn't realise it then, but our rugby education was a very privileged one. And then, once you tread that pathway in Australia, I was very lucky to push through into the TARS, go into environments with amazing players. It's funny, we won some things at Randwick, and we pushed on from there, and underage stuff with Australia and that. But when you walk into a Waratah squad and you look around the backline area of the change room where you've got Matt Burke, Chris Whittaker, Nathan Gray, Lottie Takiri, Matt Rogers, it's a really great place to learn your craft. You learn how to play inside centre from Nathan Gray. You learn how to be a professional from Matt Burke. You learn how to be a real contributor with your behaviours from Chris Whittaker. The people that I was able to play with, my first roommate at the Wallabies was Chris Latham. So to be able to play with those people that a few years before, I'd stayed up late to watch win World Cups and win big games, and to come in on the back end of that great period. And then it's funny, you said you're not going to mention the Rebels, but 2016 we played well when I was there, and then 2017, it's actually one of the proudest years of my rugby life. Truthfully, there'll be some people on here that know the true story, but the Rebels were gone. And a few individuals sacrificed a fair bit to make sure those Melbourne Rebels people and the Melbourne Rebels as a club remain in Super Rugby. So, funnily enough, yes, I played overseas, got all the great fun, lived down just above Biarritz playing for Dax, lived in Paris, coached in France. But that year in 2017, when a lot of people didn't want us in the comp and there was a few manoeuvres happening to get rid of Melbourne, we're pretty proud of what we're able to achieve, so that the people that came after, whether they appreciate it or not, actually had a club to come to.
Yeah, well, just on that, I mean, I was being a bit flippant, but to be honest,
no, mate, mate,
look,
you didn't play well, that's for sure. I agree with that.
But look, it's great to have a super side in Melbourne and the ability to go and play and see the games at the Bubble Stadium. It's a great stadium to watch rugby. You're nice and close to the action. You can hear the noise. You can hear the hits. Something Mehrtens wouldn't understand. But I think there are a few that do understand it, and hopefully we've got more games to come going forward over the next few years. Look, you were your Wallaby number 782 with a debut against Ireland in 2003, and look, you played 20 tests with, I think it was 30 points. So for the front rowers out there, that's 6 tries, just to make sure that they understand. Looking back, being a Wallaby, does it mean more to you now than it did at the time?
I think it means things differently to me now. I wouldn't say it means more. I think it was, I probably didn't appreciate how special those individual 20 were. Look, I wasn't, the harsh truth is I wasn't that good. I was a fair player, but I wasn't that good a player. And I played with some great players. I was lucky, mate. I was lucky to get those 20 opportunities. I was lucky to go to the World Cup in 03 and play with there. Went in 07, came in late in 07, so trips and World Cups, Wallaby tours. I was just really privileged to be part of that environment, and to pull that on 20 times was probably more than I deserved, mate. A few people might agree with that, but it's just a special group to be a part of. And I look at the human beings, like, when you get married, or the godfathers of my children, they're all people that I played footy with. That's and no matter what level it is, and that's one thing I've learned at the back end, and also with this stuff with Stan and in conversation Mehrtens and I have. It's not about the level. The camaraderie in a Masters change room on a weekend, the camaraderie in an under-10s change room, and the camaraderie in a test change room is very similar. They're intense relationships that mean so much to us. I suppose the one thing about the test arena is it's a really transitional period where people that you have this intense, close relationship, where you're closer to some of these people than you are with your wives or girlfriends or whatever, and they're really cyclical, and you'll turn around the next year and those people are gone. So there's a lot of grieving within that. There's a lot of anxiety within that. So I was really privileged to be in that group, and I think now my appreciation for it is a little bit different. And I think Mehrtens will agree that we try and make sure we remember that appreciation, remember what it was like to be a player while we're doing the commentary as well, because I think we all knew as players what we hated commentators saying about us. We hated when people said, they're not trying hard enough, when I think we all realise that no matter what jersey people put on that test arena, they're all doing their absolute best.
No, we see that at Masters too. People are really trying very, very, very hard just to move.
Too hard. From what I've seen in Masters, a few blokes take it too seriously.
Yeah, well, yeah, we tried to cut a little bit of that out, but once you cross that white line, if you don't go hard, you go home injured, right? So, hey, Mehrtens, welcome to Real Talk. Are you okay?
Thank you. Thank you for asking. Yes, all things considered, I'm thankful to be busy, thankful to be in a job, to be honest. I've always wondered about the "Are you okay?" and does it feel too easy to tick a box saying that particular question? Now you've got to get it down into a fairly concise slogan, so I understand that. To me, the follow-up question is as important. What's going on for you, and not so much can I fix it, or is there any way I can help, but what do you need really, or that sort of thing. So look, I'm thankful to be in a job. We've all got challenges. Like I said, my kids, I've got 3 kids in Christchurch. Haven't been able to see them in over 18 months now. At the same time, so that's difficult, but they're healthy, so I'm thankful for that. I'm not having to deal with the oncology department of a hospital every week. So, I think remembering to be thankful for things, and particularly being in a job at the moment, and also trying to show some empathy towards those who aren't at the moment. And goodness knows how we help one another, but getting the economy back moving, so it works for people. I'm trying to put as much as I can into the local grog deliverers and those sort of people. When restaurants open up, I'll be as quick as I can into the eating and drinking with everybody else. So it's pretty good. And like I say, thankful we got rugby on. Thankful we got sport. I mean, look how good Olympics was. Sad for Japan not having spectators there, but gee, the people tuning in around the world, that it gave them some, particularly as New Zealanders. I don't want to rub it into Australians, but for us, Carl, obviously, pound for pound, how we went with golds and silvers and bronze, and performances in general was superb. So, awesome that the rugby's been able to be on as well. They've moved heaven and earth to get these 4 teams together in Queensland for the next 4 weeks, and I can't wait for that. So I think just at the moment being thankful. Morg's talked about, how do you deal with that? And a lot of it's about nature and just, remembering to be thankful for the little things.
No, look, that's great. I think you're right, and it is those follow-up questions, and it's something that we've tried to do in Vic Masters through our Type 5 is just to lend an ear, and that concept of Type 5 of sort of moving things forward, not necessarily being the fixer, but just being there for each other is, and I think that's one of the great things about rugby. And you mentioned it, Morgs, that rugby is like a family, and you form lifelong bonds, and whether they're there or not the next season, they're always there. And if you pick up the phone, you're going to get an ear. It's one of the things that I love about rugby. Look, I did it for you, Morgan. I'm going to do it for you, Mertz, because there are some people out there that are Australian and they just really don't know some of the stats of your career. But, over 280 first-class games, more than 3,000 points scored.
One tackle.
108 games for Canterbury. 87 games for the Crusaders with over 980 points. All Black number 944 with 72 matches for the All Blacks with 967 test points, which at the time was a record. You played in that infamous 95 World Cup final and the follow-up World Cup, which I just still can't talk about it. But probably really importantly, you're the 35th All Black to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. I think that's a massive achievement. Range of roles overseas, commentary roles, obviously. I think you got 1 yellow card in your career. Is that right? And probably one of my best memories of you as a player, and when I talk about Pretoria, 99, a game where you got absolutely hammered by the crowd, hammered by the opposition and verbally, obviously because you avoid the contact. But then to nail that kick in the at the death, and your double salute to the crowd was a memorable moment. And so I think with a record like that, I don't think we're going to change anyone's opinion of you tonight. But looking back on your career, is there a moment or a match that really stands out for you?
Well, there are lots of moments, and they don't all come from test matches, of course, and they don't all come from Super Rugby. Exactly what Morgs was talking about before. I can remember pretty vividly back to my high school first 15, losing to Christ College. I played for Christchurch Boys High, the state school. We played Christ College. The college supporters always labelled it the landlords versus the tenants. And we had a really strong history against Christ College, and we lost our year 11-7. I remember that vividly. I also remember back to my under 12, the last game of the season, where I was playing for Kaiapoi out in North Canterbury, and we were 12-all, 3 tries apiece, all missed conversions up to that point against Oxford, which was another famous club, provided a lot of, Canterbury Farmer sort of All Blacks as well. And I managed to somehow squeak a conversion over, and we won 14-12 in the under 12s. And I did a little, probably a pretty effeminate jump in the air as I was running back to halfway. So it's moments really that stand out. It's absolutely no different in Test rugby as well. It's the personalities that you're lucky enough to tour alongside. Moments in games occasionally. I mean, I had a couple of moments. One was in Brisbane in '96, where at the end of the game I got put into space and realised pretty quickly when the crowd started roaring that I was in space, but also realised I had to do something with it because I was never going to go the whole way myself. And I looked outside me and I saw the most beautiful sight, I reckon, ever of Christian Cullen and Jeff Wilson basically running in step. They're both really smooth runners, of course. And I remember thinking at the time, I'll remember this. I'll have this image imprinted on my brain for the rest of my life. And I do. And again, realised pretty quickly afterwards, I've got to get the ball to one of these buggers. So thankfully managed to get it out there. So it wasn't my fault if they stuffed it after that. So moments like that. I mean, there was one time I remember in my first test match back in Christchurch in hometown, I was the most nervous I reckon I've been in any game in my life. And it didn't work well. We won, and it was all through kicks. It was an ugly game, but I kicked badly. I think I kicked 5 from 9. And I just remember at one point during the game, was set up ready to take a shot. The ball was there. I was at the back of my run, and I just started almost having this sort of existential crisis, thinking, isn't this funny? You know, who would have thought this when I was 9 or 10? I'm standing here and 40,000 people here watching, probably a couple of million maybe watching on TV. What I'm about to do, isn't this weird? So I had a couple of little moments like that. I managed to get the kick. It wasn't pretty, but I got it. So, you know, like Morg said, you look back on moments, you look back on teammates. I've loved coming to Sydney post my rugby career and getting to build a deeper relationship with guys that I share a lot of history with. Might have been on the other team at that stage, but we've got shared experiences in those matches. And so, you know, the likes of Morgs and Stephen Hoyles, he mentioned before as well, Phil Waugh, Phil Kearns, David Giffen, those guys, being able to build a deeper relationship after that shared experience has been pretty cool as well.
Can anyone actually build a relationship with Phil Kearns? Just interesting.
Well, I managed to. He gave me a job, so I had to.
Fair enough. So you were paid to be his friend. Is that what you're saying?
It was jobs for the lads, and it was a huge boost that I got because, you know, he'd worked for Investec, he'd distributed funds into institutional investors, and he needed me to do a role in that space, and he basically just handed me whether it was Rolodex or bunch of cards at that stage, and huge door opener. So he gave me a massive boost coming into financial services in Sydney. At the same time, the rugby banter, and I saw it blow up straight away here on the side, saying, Carl, you know, you could have ironed your shirt, and then somebody else pipes in and combed your hair. But that rugby banter doesn't change. And It was probably a couple of months into my career with Kearnsy, and I hit top weight. And I always carried a bit of a big toilet. All my weight went to my ass and thighs. But I managed to hit 100 kgs. And that's not a good weight for me. I should really be probably 82, 83 if I was healthy. But I hit 100 kg. Kearnsy promptly sent an email. I'd made the mistake of telling my boss. He sent an email around the entire company, 300 people, and said, just wanted to congratulate Mehrtens on hitting the 3 figures. We're going to celebrate by knocking over a few Tim Tams in the canteen. Make sure you get there before he does. I think he got a shoulder tap by HR saying you probably shouldn't be saying that, but I didn't care. And like I say, the banter you see on the side is exactly the same.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's great fun, and you know, I think I think that's something we probably share is that, you know, you give as good as you take, and it is a great part of rugby. Hey, Morgs, you mentioned it before about having an Aussie mum and a Maori father. Some might say that should give you good looks and intelligence. Did it?
Well, unfortunately, I've got my video on, so you know half of it. Look, I'll tell you what it was. It was a source for embarrassment because, there were times we were playing at Bledisloe, a couple of Bledisloe games, and all the parents would sit together, and there's a sea of gold. And there's one bloke in the middle in an All Blacks jumper, not unlike yours. So, Swanning run their aftermatch function with his Wallabies accreditation in an All Black jersey. So I think at home I had enough of All Black supporters, let alone out and about. Even now he lives down the south coast, when I pull into the driveway door will be open. There'll be an All Blacks flag just hanging from the door down there. So I can never escape you lot, that's for sure.
I like your dad already. I think we get on really well, actually. Having sort of, half some of your family over in New Zealand and some in Australia, how was that for you growing up?
We had lots of visitors. My grandmother, most of the family in Hamilton, some in Auckland, some in Narrowea, all around there, and we're Turinui, obviously. And so we had lots of visitors come over. Everyone wanted to come over to the eastern suburbs on holiday. So I got to spend lots of time with my grandmother, which was great. And Dad's one of 12, so we had cousins and aunties and uncles over all the time. And the great thing was, eventually, when I played for the Waratahs, we played the Chiefs. I had to go around to all the players and say, look, boys, can I get everyone's tickets for this game? I've got a fair few people coming, and there were fights within the family about who the real cousins were, who wasn't. There was a hierarchy of cousins to be able to get the tickets, and I just assumed that they would all support the home team. And then the first time I played there in 2003, I think we ran out, and there was genuinely 80 people, all in Waratahs kit, all Turinui family. So the support of the Turinui side of the family has followed me right around the world, whether it be turn up at Auckland Airport and there's a big case of seafood to be taken home to my father that I have to carry onto the plane with everyone else in the styrofoam white case to carry along. And I was just really lucky to have great support and that it didn't matter what colour the jersey I had on was, that the family, and I think everyone here will appreciate it, family was stronger than anything. So they've been a great support to me right throughout my career all around the world. And even now, with the commentary of Super and things that, the stand commentary gets across the other side, they're very supportive in this part of my life as well. And then, the Australian side was exactly the same. So I was able to live the best of both worlds.
No, that's brilliant. So as a Wallaby and with that Māori heritage, how was it for you facing the haka?
It was a really special moment, actually. We sat down and had a chat not long ago around one of the teasers for the test match. And it was, I went to Sunday Maori culture classes in Sydney, learned, I think the first song we learned was Uma Wapiti, and then, which Mehrtens knows, I think Mehrtens started singing it straight back to me, first song. and what I talked about, and then we'd learn the haka, we'd learn some of the Turinui specific songs as well. And so that was a really important. So, there's video of me as a thrall doing the haka. There's, I think till about 89, that great series in 89, Kerwin scores this great try in the third test. I think All Blacks won the first test. I think it was a 9-all draw in the second test. Mertz, you might correct me, 88, 89. And Kerwin scores this amazing try. And I was an All Blacks supporter till about then, and doing a haka with an All Blacks jersey on in front of the TV. And so then to face up to it, was just a special moment. And I suppose a lot of people talk about, is it intimidating to face and whatever. For me, whether it was that connection or not, it was the greatest thing I could ask for to prepare me to play. I found it great to get my focus laser focused, and it was a special experience to be a part of.
Big moment for your old man. How was he with that?
Yeah, well, look, mate. So my old man, you can imagine, he's a pretty humble bloke, as many of them are. And I think the only advice he ever gave me was to pull my socks up and make sure my jersey was tucked in. That's the only rugby advice I ever got from him. But, I don't think he missed a game I played anywhere in Australia till I was about 18 and going overseas somewhere where he couldn't go to play. So we'd drive to an hour and a half to the north side of Sydney to play school rugby in the morning, and another hour and a half to the southwest of Sydney to play club. So in terms of tangible support for me, but apart from that, I wouldn't even have known what he would have thought. He would never say.
Yeah, don't worry, it's a great diversion, but we're not going to talk about the haka and you. So I
wasn't meaning to try and take over the show, but we're broadcasting.
I've got you covered.
You can't help yourself. Yeah.
Hey, but look, you're no stranger to the Māori heritage culture element either, Mertz. But you were born in Durban, and that might account for a number of things with you. But the first decade of your life was spent in a very tiny little village, should we call it, in Tuahiwi, just north of Christchurch, just across the river. It's a really small community, and in my research, you've said that you spent a lot of that time speaking Māori. What are some of your memories of that time? What are some of the things that you look back on, some of the experiences that you had at that time?
Actually, one of them would be the rugby experience of the 1981 Springbok tour that came out to New Zealand. Now, I was too young to understand all the issues of it. But, when you say I was born in Durban, that came around through a bit of an anomaly, really. My parents, who were both from rural North Canterbury, went across on a delayed honeymoon and went to South Africa. And, of course, in the late 60s, it was then early 70s, it was, if you're a European visited it, it's an amazing country. And it obviously had a strong rugby heritage. My father was over there. They wanted to go to safaris and stuff. And then he also knew a Kiwi who was playing club rugby in Durban, and actually for Natal province, a guy called Peter Hatchwell. And Hatch said to my old man, why don't you guys come and settle down in Durban for a while? Beautiful climate. We'll get you jobs. They're both primary school teachers. So I've got a certain sympathy, or real sympathy for teachers, because they always said to me, don't be a teacher. And I never could have done what they did at all. And we're all getting a little taste of it in homeschooling. But so they went and set up in Durban. My old man had played. So there was rugby running through the family, as there always is in New Zealand, because there wasn't a lot else to do up until recently, where they've got much more options. But my father had played against the Springboks in 65. He played for the New Zealand under-21s. And then he went over to South Africa and managed to get in the Natal team and played the All Blacks, who had come over on tour in 1970. after I was born, they came back to New Zealand, got a job. He got a job. He wasn't Māori, but he really getting a job in a little Māori town called Turinui, as you say. Population 15 to 20, maybe 5 or 6 families. All the kids at the school were Māori kids or local farmers. So it was an interesting sort of blend, and everyone got on well. But my old man threw himself right into the Māori culture, the Māori tanga, they call it. We call it. And was intent on, and bless him for it, intent on the school being fully bilingual. So, yeah, like you say, up till when I was 11, I was bilingual. It embarrasses me to have lost it. I think it's probably always sitting there as well, particularly around pronunciation, but it was a very, very big part of me. So, I felt really privileged. I felt like I had an interesting connection to a strong rugby country like South Africa. Obviously, through the 80s, that there were a lot of ructions there and stuff. So I'm not an apologist for South Africa at all, but I was, felt really connected to South Africa there, but also to my father and his jerseys that he had, his father's jerseys. His father had played for Canterbury and played for the All Blacks against New South Wales. So I had an old All Black jersey, a fullback jersey, number 1. I had my old man's juniors jersey and his Natal jersey. So it was just rugby and very simple existence as a kid, out and about, just, get out of the house, or you probably wouldn't even go in the house after school. You'd just be barefoot down. I know all these Kiwis always talk about playing barefoot rugby on a Saturday morning in the frost. Well, I don't reckon too many played in the frost and the barefoot. There weren't too many bloody frosts up in the Waikato.
No. But, down in Canterbury there were.
But we would be barefoot during the week in the afternoon when it was hot.
Yeah.
I could have been playing on frost and bare feet. But so it was just a very typical Kiwi country upbringing. I was very privileged to have that Māori element in my upbringing, and it's made me also look at being across here as well. I know it's a very, very different situation with the Indigenous here, much smaller numbers who have actual genetic links to Aboriginal peoples, but at the same time, the things that are consistent between Māori, Tonga, and New Zealand and Aboriginals here is that it's unique in the world. It's Australian culture. And I know people from either end of the spectrum feel that it gets forced, that they're always going to be the extremes. But I think for the bulk of the people in between, giving as many Australians exposure to that culture that is part of their heritage, without that Aboriginal culture here, it's a mini United States, really. New Zealand, without our Māori heritage, we're a mini Australia, or a mini England. So, that's our point of difference in the world. So I loved it. And I still think it's an incredibly rich culture, very much a part of the All Blacks, obviously, and thank goodness. I mean, Māori and farmers took to rugby alike right from the early days in rugby, and it's been part of the strength of rugby and part of probably the strength of. We're not perfect as a country in terms of cultural appreciation, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, look, just coming back to what you were saying about the language, and you feel like you feel a bit that you've lost a little bit there. But I mean, language is something that you have quite a bit of a fondness for, right? And many of our listeners might not know that. But, on a serious note, a few years ago, you were the ambassador for Māori Language Week. And I think you did a lot to try to sort of move the commentators to actually spend a bit of time learning how to pronounce the names properly of Pacifica players, which I think has been an absolute advance in the way that we approach rugby. But what is it about you that makes you a cunning linguist?
Well, I think it's having spoken Māori all my youth. I think as soon as you speak another language when you're young, I'm no scientist or anatomical expert, but as I understand it, up to the age of sort of 2 or 3, you learn languages differently. You learn them basically as a motor skill rather than an acquired knowledge, which you do. There are certain points in your age. So I think having grown up with a love for it, with an appreciation of how a language works differently, that it's not always word for word, I think that helps you picking up other languages. And so I gravitated towards languages going through school. I learned French, went overseas when I was 20, played rugby in Italy, and Italian to me seemed simpler than French and more fun and certainly more musical and expressive. And so it was just one of those things. I just really enjoyed language. And I think if I could say anything about language, I think mimicry is really important, to get pronunciation correct. You can be saying the words, you could say a perfect sentence, but if you pronounce it all incorrectly, nobody's going to understand in that language. But if you pronounce the word correctly, even if you've got the concept wrong, at least people know what you're saying. So I think imitation is important. So yeah, and what seemed absurd to me 3 or 4 years ago when we were doing the commentary, and I'm no saint, by the way, I'm not trying to be any sort of woke beacon of hope for humanity or anything like that. But it did seem absurd to me in the commentaries where our commentators would make such a huge effort to get Argentinian names pronounced correctly. You know, we'd be talking to the manager and talking to the staff and getting cues on how to pronounce, you know, Leguizamon from Argentina or Cuesta Silva or whatever. And we're making so much effort on those. And at the same time, the majority of us were you know, brutalizing, if that's even a word, killing Māori names. You know, we'd be saying Pakuranga instead of Pakuranga. And I just thought it's a little bit of ignorance from us and a little bit of lack of pride in our unique culture. So, you know, we got in behind it. It was a lot of good fun, and it was a lot of good fun. I can't even speak English now. The interesting thing was, though, they did a Māori Language Week poster or calendar, and it went out to all these schools. And my daughter at school in Christchurch, at a reasonably European school, they have kapa haka and stuff like that, which is cool. But she got this little calendar, and the word for language in Māori is reo, R-E-O, but it's pronounced reo rather than Rio. And my daughter came up to me and said, "Look, Dad, I got this calendar that you were in it." I said, "Oh, that's good, darling. What was that for?" And she said, "Oh, it's we got it at Te Reo Week." And I thought, oh my goodness, so it makes me think, you know, and I think it'll be the same for the Indigenous languages here in Australia. It's probably best not to confuse kids by writing them out. They're probably oral languages to be learnt. And you can learn them through song and through other oral traditions rather than writing them up on a board. Because when kids are trying to learn sight words and learn the, what's it called, irregular sounds of English and how to write them down, it's just going to confuse things, and it's not going to allow them to embrace their local Indigenous languages. Sorry to sound like I'm soapboxing, but it's important to me. I loved seeing the Welcome to Country on Sunday in Perth. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. I think, you know, I don't know, there's been a lot of criticism at times about how long the Welcome to Country has taken, and people sort of snigger there into their beers and stuff like that. But I think it's really important. And I think the more we do it and the more we embrace that side of our Australian culture, the better. And sorry to be speaking for Australian culture. 2 Kiwis on here and half a Kiwi, but there's one Australian in here, so you're probably better qualified than I am, Morgs.
Yeah, so Morgs, how do you approach learning some of the pronunciations of names for all of these different players?
Yeah, a little bit. It's like the process. Often we'll go to the media guy, but sometimes with some of the guys within Australia, we'll go to them and just, you know, Matt Taumua is a really good example, and Marika Corimbetti. Matt Taumua was always Matt Taumua, and you know what? In discussions with him, he said, "Look, I don't care." He goes, "But I know that it would mean a lot to my family, especially my old man." So I think if there's a little way we can show respect to the person, their family, and we've just finished talking about how family is such an important part of us getting to where we get to in rugby or in anything. If it's a little way you can show more respect and appreciation for a person and their family, it can't be a bad thing. You know, Sean Maloney still gets messages online saying, "What an idiot, why are you pronouncing Matt Taumua like that? Why are you pronouncing Marika Corimbetti? Where's this M rubbish from Maloney? You're an idiot." But I think it's really important on the back of what Mehrtens said. It is a really small way of showing respect for people. And look, showing respect for people in the world today is never a bad thing. And I find it interesting listening to Mehrtens, because the stories that I received growing up are really different around language in New Zealand. Dad was born in, I think, 1951, and as a kid growing up in the 50s, everyone would call him Cam in Sydney, and it was only until I saw his passport when I was about 12 that I realised that his first name was Carthena. And I said, "Well, Dad, what's the story?" He said, "Well, we were encouraged not to use that name. I was encouraged to use Cameron as a kid, and we were told not to speak Maori." So he was, and it was a lot. You know, I talked about Maori culture on Sundays, things like that. It was a lot for him to go back to it, because, you know, the environment that he grew up in was very much to try and step away from that and to anglicise themselves. And he speaks more Maori these days than I ever heard him growing up. It was very much an English language household, because that was his mindset, and it took him a long time to circle back to it. Even there was a time I played Australian schoolboys in '99 over in New Zealand. There was a time there where it was talked about whether I would go and play in New Zealand onto the New Zealand pathway and go and study in New Zealand. There are opportunities being made for me to have some supported study and learn language. And he said, well, why would you bother doing that? And then it's only as we've had discussions as he's gotten older and older, and he's really circled back to his upbringing and his family that he understands why that was an important thing for that next generation coming through. And all my cousins, that's a really important part of their life.
So let's just sort of pivot that just a little bit.
Yeah, I've gone off again. Sorry, I've gone off subject. Mertz does a tangent and I keep going.
I think that's amazing. And you can't force people, and he obviously has found his home and has, raised his family in Australia, and you can't make people go back to that. I would love every Māori to be able to embrace their heritage, but they've all had different experiences, so everyone knows when it's the right time. Talking about, Matt Turinui, that's fantastic. There's another one, Scotty CO, who says, no, I'm happy being CO. I've been Scotty CO all my life in Australia. It doesn't need to be CO. And, you can't force him to. His old man actually played in Christchurch, Tavita CO. But, and it's not just Pacific cultures that Australians done that to. So there has been the great evening process, evening out, I mean. I worked with a bloke called Frank Tesorero, and I was like, how do you spell that? And it was an Italian background meaning treasurer, tesoriero. But nobody calls him tesorero. It's always tesorero. So it wasn't specific, it was just the way it was done. Let's just read it as it looks to us.
It's interesting. So my last name's Ramage. And my mum says it's Ramage like bucket for those that used to watch, Keeping Up Appearances with Mrs. Bouquet. But, it can be pronounced in many different ways. I can be Ramahere, I can be Ramaji, or I can be Ramage. There's lots of different ways that I can pronounce it. So,
what is it?
Sorry?
Rich.
Sorry?
Where's it from?
I believe that it has some French connection somewhere along the way. Something to do with birds singing in the trees. Ramage. Like some sort of smelly cheese, I think. But, it can be pronounced in different ways. So I guess it kind of does make sense to me that, it might be a small thing to have the name pronounced right, but it does show that little bit of respect. And I think that's a really good point that you make there, Morgs. And I think, we have a lot of Pacifica players in our playing group, and I for one would love to learn how to pronounce their names properly rather than just mate, which is I think the Aussie default for if you're not really sure how to say it, you just say mate. Look, talking about sort of that sort of thing sort of leads me to think about sort of some of the role models that you guys might have had coming through the rugby system, some of the role models and mentors, and both of you came through systems that are well regarded for pathways through to the elite game. Morgs, who were some of your mentors and influences that sort of dragged you through from that young player playing in the background to becoming a Wallaby?
Well, there's a couple of guys. I think we can all remember some of those school coaches that we had along the way, and we're really lucky. I was at a Waverley College in Sydney. It's either the world's worst private school or the world's best public school. It depends which way you want to look at it. But it's our local Catholic school, and it's a good school for rugby. And we had a Christian brother, Bob Wallace, who ran the Australian schoolboys itself. So I was very lucky that anytime I needed physio or anything coming through, I'd just get a leave pass from class. It didn't help me get through my maths and English, but it definitely meant I was ready to go on the weekend. So I had some great coaches all the way through. But by the time I'd left school and pushed through, I was lucky enough to be coached by Michael Checker. He was coaching second grade at Randwick, and I came back and played a couple of games for them from, I think, 21s and things like that. And then I played first grade with him for 2 years. And that was a really transitional time for me where I'd been on the pathway. I'd played schoolboys for a couple of years, did the sevens thing, did the 21s, played super. I'd played for the Wallabies, come back out of the squad, and it was that sort of two roads diverged in a yellow wood moment for me. And him and David Knox as a coaching pair, they were really important for me to rediscover love for the game. You go into the professional thing. I played Test rugby at 21, World Cup on home soil at 21, and then 2004 was an up and down year in and out of the Wallaby team, and that was a real crossroads moment for me. I was 22 and I was having a midlife crisis in rugby already, and to be able to go back to the the club where you'd come from that had pushed you all the way up there and rediscover love for the game. 2004 will always be the most fun I ever playing rugby. I mentioned guys like Hoyles. I played rugby with Sean Mackay, Steve Hoyles, Pat Phibbs, Lee Tamiki, Chris Whitaker, all these, a bit with Owen Finnegan in 03, but 04 was playing with your best mates on a Saturday afternoon at Park Footy at Coogee Oval for the club that you grew up watching. That was the most fun I ever had. And everything that went on from there afterwards, I really was much more appreciative of opportunity to get better, of opportunity to train, opportunity to play, opportunity to travel, be in those environments. I was a much different person after that year. Because it just really refound my love of the game and centered me around the game. And look, there's great coaches, but just as much, if not even more influentially, the great teammates. And I mentioned a lot of the names, but great friends and great teammates that made it worthwhile, that made it fun, that could say a quiet word to you on the side in the middle of a fitness thing that would mean much more than 1,000 words from a coach. And I always found that, George Gregan was my test captain my whole career. We had times with Sterling Mortlock at the end. But, a stare from Griggs, Mertz, you'll know it, a stare from Griggs is worth more than anything a coach could say. And that's notwithstanding Eddie Jones at his best. Often when you're playing for Gregan as your Wallaby captain or Whitaker as your task captain or Burke, I think was the captain when I first came in, you didn't want to let them down more than anything. You didn't care about yourself or your own advancement or whatever. I was too scared to let those guys who were my heroes down.
So, Mertz, who were they for you? Because you were surrounded by, for me, just absolute legends of Canterbury rugby and All Black rugby. Who was it that gave you the stink eye that made you fire up?
Well, if you saw me, nobody made me fire up. I got fired up getting off the field, to be honest, with all these big blokes floating around. Look, I'd always say, my father's a given, and my parents married 53 years this year and stuff, and the most humble people I've ever met. And so I'm very thankful for that. My old man was a rugby player, played plenty of rugby, never tried to give me too much advice. After about the age of 16 or 17, not that he thought I couldn't do with advice, but he just didn't want the punish of trying to give it and have an argument. Anyway, my old man's fantastic. Wayne Smith, coaching for me, has been there all the way through my career as a mentor, both on the field, off the field, whatever. The most amazing coach who just cares about his players and wants them to do well. Vance Stewart was a coach who gave me a couple of really crucial opportunities because, a lot of it's about luck. You've got to be good enough to take the opportunity you're given, but getting it in the first place can rely on some luck. So I'm thankful to him. But I'm also mindful, you're probably on this sort of a thing, people don't want to get on, listen to me talk about my theory of pronunciation of names. They probably want to just hear about touring and getting pissed and that sort of stuff. So I saw the question about Colin Meads, and from James, I think Colin Meads, who was the All Black manager when I first got in the All Blacks in 95. Firstly, getting into the Canterbury team for me had been very lucky because we just got past the era where old players made it really difficult and unpleasant for young players. It was a really earn your stripes sort of thing. When I came into the Canterbury team, there was Rob Penny, who just finished coaching prematurely at the Waratahs this year, Chris England, Shane Philpott, Shane Basham, guys like that. You knew you had to earn their respect, but they didn't beat you down for it. They encouraged you to be yourself. In the All Blacks, I found the exact same thing. So in 95, when I made my debut, it all happened so quickly. I wasn't worthy. I think it's a great attitude as a rugby player to have. It's a bonus. You're not entitled to anything. And some of the most talented players I've ever seen, Dan Carter and McCaw, they don't consider it their right to be in the team. So, Morgan's self-deprecatingly describing himself before, which was complete rubbish, but I think it's still a great attitude to have, that everything you got was a bonus and you were lucky to get that. But it all happened so quickly for me to get in the 95 All Blacks. And suddenly I was, after all these trial matches, and I was lucky to miss a few that the team lost and I was injured. Then I had to play a game just so they could see me, and we put 95 points on a Waikato invitation team. So I basically had to be put in the team. So that was like, suddenly I'm playing alongside Zinzan Brooke and Frank Bunce and Walter Little, and they made me feel I deserved my spot there, or that I was welcome, but also that there were expectations. And so it was a really perfect blend. So I was very lucky. Colin Meads was the coach. I remember probably the most nervous time of my first test was going the day before and going to his room and picking up my jersey from him, and his whole hand basically swallowed my entire arm. So I was more worried probably about letting him down on my first test against Canada than letting down the rest of the team. But and we had a good win that day. I mean, Canada could be up and down, but they weren't wonderful then. We had a good win in Auckland, and one of the great traditions the All Blacks had, and I had no inkling of this before. I'm sitting in the changing rooms after my first test. We've had a win. I'm just thankful I haven't blown the stadium up somehow. And Frank Bunce came across to me, and he had Gareth Rees, the Canadian captain. And Gareth Rees gave me his Canadian jersey, and Frank Bunce gave Gareth Rees his own jersey. And I said, what's going on here? And Buncey said, you want to keep your first test jersey. Everybody does, and that's a given. We got a tradition that one of the older players swaps with the opposition and donates his jersey so you can get that as well. So I ended up with my jersey and an opposition jersey from my first test, which was a beautiful tradition. I had no idea. I managed to reciprocate 6 years later when Aaron Major played his first test in Ireland, and I swapped with Kevin Maggs and stuff. I doubt it goes on now because I think they get 2 jerseys, but I'm sitting in a changing room thinking, I'm not worthy of being here. And Frank Bunce goes and donates his All Black jersey to get me a jersey. He was also the guy later on when I got a bit yappy at the court session because I was relieved finally and I yap a bit. And he was the guy that got sent across the room to give me a chest punch basically to shut me the hell up. So he was a kind of a father figure for me. But Pine Tree, he didn't make us go into the changing rooms after that 95 World Cup to have a keg. But the next day we got up at 10:30 and we had a big session. And it was, I'm not advocating for it necessarily, but it was at the time it pulled everyone together and made it's never going to change the result. So Pine Tree in that session was interesting. He always looked after. He called me the Wart. I'd used to go up bouncing around to him because I'd need to get extra balls for my kicking training, or I'd need to get a car to take me to the hotel to go down kicking training. So I'd bounce up to him and say, "Hey, Tree," Pine Tree's nickname. "Hey, Tree," and he'd just look around and go, "What do you want, you little fucking wart?" And I took that fondly. But in this massive court session, we had about a 7-hour court session in the hotel the day after this World Cup final. And somebody over the far side of the room started a game of punching next. So they'd just punch the bloke next to them and say next. And it would start going around. And over this side of the room, we're sort of laughing. And I've suddenly come to the realization slowly, this is going to make its way to me. And I'm sitting beside Colin Meads. And as it got around, and actually, you know what? You wouldn't want to be the guy punching Colin Meads, but it was all well and good. Anyway, before anyone could see it, he put his hand up on my head and just punched his hand. And it still just about broke my jaw. But it did enough to stop me getting cut open, and it knocked me, and he held back a little bit. So he was always looking after a little pathetic little guy like me. So Pine Tree, if that can tie it in with James's question, no, he did later in that year have something that's gone down in All Black history. In 95, at the end of the year, we toured France, and we lost the first test in Paris, and we were pathetic. And I'd actually left the tour with an injury, but Pine Tree sat the boys down after that, the day after, and he tore a strip off every single one of them. Closed the door. They had a couple of the sponsors in there, like the Steinlager representatives. He looked over at the Steinlager rep and he said, "You fuck off." And out he went, and he was happy to do so. And he started with the coach, Laurie Mains, who was a hard ass, and he tore strips off him about what he'd been like during the week. And he went around every single player in the room. You could have heard a pin drop. And I think it took about an hour before he finished with all of them and said, "Buck your fucking ideas up." And they went and won the next test.
That's brilliant. But you've got a bit of a reputation at court sessions, haven't you? I think you might have to join one of our Vic Masters ones. But wasn't there an incident with you with one of the Lowe brothers at a court session where you were shut up for a while?
This was with Canterbury. We'd won the Ranfurly Shield, which is the Challenge Trophy in New Zealand. And the tradition there was all your home games are challenges. And then in the week in between, when you normally go on the road, because you've been celebrating keeping the Ranfurly Shield, the other team smashes you. We went up to King Country, to Tekawiti, not far from Turinui country, of course, and we lost. We got thumped by King Country. Now, they were bottom of the table. We were top of the table. We got 50 points put on us. Philippe Rayaki scored 4 tries. As you do, we had a court session to drown our sorrows, which was a really good court session and a big one. And then at the end, we all got together when it broke up and no more rules and things, and everyone was standing around having a beer. And I found myself alongside Richard Lowe, about 4 or 5 of us in a row. Something was being sung. I don't know. It might have been Hoki Mai. I doubt Richard Lowe knows the words to Hoki Mai, Tama Mai. But I remember having an out-of-body experience where I realised he's not singing, and it might be a good idea to pour a glass of piss over his head. So next thing, I'm looking at my body from above, looking at this guy pouring a glass of beer over Richard Lowe's head and sort of moving away. The response from the farmer was to put one hand up around my neck. I was choke-a-hold out of there in about 5 seconds, they reckon, went to sleep. I put to bed, woke up in the morning having no recollection, and when I walked into the team room for breakfast, I'd sort of get a couple of steps in here. How did that stop? Walk a little bit. And finally got told what had happened. I took on Richard Lowe and I was alive to talk about it.
Yeah, not many people can say that. But Morgs, player welfare is obviously a pretty important thing at the moment. The Wallabies are under a lot of pressure at the moment. They've been given caught a new one pretty much in the last 3 games, and they're getting crucified in the media. What does the team do to sort of bring those players through the criticism from the media and the thousands of social media referees and experts that are out there? What are they doing to support those guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't mind referring to some of Mehrtens' stuff if you don't mind. Are we on a bad time limit, or we're okay? Because I know Mehrtens talks a lot, but just
go for it, mate.
Just to back up the Wayne Smith. When you mentioned Wayne Smith, I was lucky that sort of got connected to John Hart, who connected me with Wayne Smith via email. I'd shaken his hand a couple of times after matches and didn't know him, but never really talked to him. And he said, look, I was coaching at the time, and John Hart said, look, email Smithy and try and catch up with him. He was coming to the Storm a lot. And in the end, we could never get our calendars to link up. So one day he emailed me and said, look, why don't you just fly over, come and stay at my place for 3 days, and you can stay with Trish and I, and I'll answer any questions you want. I sort of, are you sure? Like, yeah, just come over. So I did, booked the flight, hired the car, all those sorts of stuff. And I spent 3 of the most amazing days. Like there's all these great personalities, characters, reputations in rugby. There's great coaches and all that. And often it sounds bad, but you'll know this. You'll meet some people that you've been in awe of, you'll be disappointed, or you'll meet some guru coach and you go, like this. I learnt more in 3 days talking to Wayne Smith than I learnt in 20 years of rugby. Like, the bloke he must be half Australian, I think, and half New Zealander. He's that good. Like, he must have the balance right. But when people say the professor, the best coach, there is no doubt from anything that I've seen that is exactly right. I was just in awe of the man, the intellect, the humility, the simple wisdom that he had. And, he didn't know me, and he opened up his home. I stayed in his home with him. We went and we watched some local rugby sevens together. It was 3 days. It was almost another out-of-body experience in the amount of information I was able to get from the all-time great coach. And then the other one is Mehrtens, just with the Wallabies, did the same thing with first cap players, which I didn't know. I played my debut, as you mentioned, Carl, 2003 Ireland in Perth. And I'm sitting in the change room. We've won. It's been great. Griggs brings the match ball over, which both captains have signed. I get the match ball. Keith Wood comes in. He was a non-playing member of the party that day. He was injured. And he brings in Jordan Murphy's jersey, who I'd marked. And he comes over to me, and I think, oh, no, he's going to swap my first test jersey. I'm going to lose my first test jersey. And so it's Keith Wood. I said, I just thought this is what you did. I didn't know what to do. And I was heartbroken. I took my jersey off and I went to offer it to him. And he said, no, this is for you. Jordan sent it in. He's had to go and get stitched up, but he wanted you to have his jersey. And a little bit like you, Mert, I was able to give mine to Conrad Smith a couple of years later, so that Lachlan Mackay on his test debut for the Wallabies was able to have both those. So it might, come 2007, 2008, that tradition was still going along, I think, at least in the Wallabies. So hopefully it still is, because I just think it is a wonderful tradition. Just another example of yes, we're biased, but how great our game is. So sorry for those two little ones on the back of the notes. But look, the Wallabies, they've been beaten up, haven't they? And it's funny, when you talk about so I reckon 2007 was the first time that social media, that World Cup in 2007, was the first time that social media really started to influence teams. I remember we had an issue with a photo that was taken at a bar with something that was happening in the background that got posted on social media. Everyone can understand exactly what that would have been. So someone doing something and his partner was back home. And that was the first time we ever had an issue with.
Can you still hear Morg's Smirts?
Maybe they haven't rolled out that better broadband out to his.
Hasn't paid his NBN bill, I don't think. Look, while he's on pause, I'll talk about player welfare a little bit with you. So the HIA is something that's sort of come into our game more recently, and the assessments and having a third party decide whether a player comes back onto the field. And on the weekend, we saw 2 All Blacks, and Severe and Taylor, not replaced, obviously failed their HIA. What are your thoughts on that? There were some comments that the game should have stopped. Did we get that right on the weekend? Or
look, to be honest, I didn't. I mean, I was commentating the game and I didn't see it in the background. I mean, afterwards I saw the Savia hit, which was friendly fire. I think, Morgs is back. Sorry.
Apologies about that, because I must not have paid the Wi-Fi.
Happy to jump in, mate. You know me, always fill up the space with shit.
Did you cut me out, Mertz? I'd gone past my words.
No, I gave it some time. Carl got in there, mate.
Yeah, it was something that Wayne Smith said, take the space.
Exactly.
So Mertz followed up. So continue with what you were saying, Morgs.
No, sorry, I'm not sure where I got to, but just around social media, and that there's all the great things about it, but also the negative, I suppose, for individual athletes is that every opinion has oxygen, every opinion has reach. We've seen the great thing around spectator engagement when it's a positive thing, and guys are probably idolised more than they ever have been with reach. And then there's the other side to it. So that's the great challenge. Lots of players will say, I don't read this, I don't do that. They all do. They do. And if they haven't heard it, then someone close to them has, and they'll hear about it. And that's something that this generation of players have had to deal with more than any other in the history of sport. And so that'll be really important. And look, you got the challenge. The great thing about it is they've got an immediate challenge. It's almost better that they've got to get straight back on the horse with a different challenge. I don't mind saying it here as long as everyone's happy to keep it in the stream, but I expect to see Quade Cooper play 10 for the Wallabies this week. So once that team's announced, that'll be huge around messaging. And so the real great example there is Noah Lolosio. How does Dave Rennie manage the messaging around him? Okay, you got to feel for the poor kid. I think he played 8 test matches and 5 of them against the All Blacks or something like that. So
Steve
bugger. Yeah, exactly. But how they manage, you talk about that welfare, how they manage him individually, let alone the whole team, is really important. He's been thrown into the wolves. He's been back to be given some confidence as well. They've picked and stuck with him a few times. How they manage bouncing him back? Do you put him on the bench? Do you give him a bit of a break away from things? How do you build things around him? I think, there's no point not having honest, direct feedback. I think all athletes crave feedback. Even the Mertz will know, he and I, even with commentary now, we finish commentary and I'm going straight to the boss going, what do I need to do better? What was, I missed that count, I missed that ad. Gee, I talked there, sorry, Mertz, I cut you off. Come on, boys, we've got to be a better team. We're always talking about the commentary team. We crave that feedback. And how that messaging is given to players now is so crucial. My experience with coaching and giving feedback now is there's a generation of players that are not great on-field communication. The real elite ones, that's a real point of difference at the moment, is on-field comms. And then off-field, they want everything in terms of feedback and review. They want it quick and they want it predominantly positive. And that's just the way this generation is. And so, everything has to be yes, direct, but always with that positive growth mindset spin on it.
I just want to take your point there on comms on field, because I think it's something that's quite noticeable with the Wallabies is they're very quiet. And they have been for quite some time. And I think what crystallised it for me on Sunday watching was when Blackadder came on for the All Blacks, he didn't stop talking. He was yelling and screaming. He had a role. And it was very clear then that the other side were quiet. Is that a problem with the Wallabies, that they're just not talking as much on field?
Yeah, I think it's a quiet generation. I found that in my coaching. I came back from overseas, coached in France, came back, coached at Randwick for a bit, then had those 2 seasons or 1.5 seasons at the Rebels. And I just couldn't believe how quiet they were. I grew up as a 13, as a 12. mate, comms is a huge part of your role. Your eyes and ears for 10 so much. 10's talking to 9. I'm talking to 10. Outside backs are talking to me. You're telling me that if Matt Burke, Lottie Takiri, Matt Rogers, or Chris Latham wanted the ball, they didn't tell you about it. And if you didn't get it, you got more communication afterwards. It was pretty direct. And I really find it interesting that it is in Australia anyway. I'd love to hear some of the opinions of Mehrtens and what he's seen possibly in New Zealand, but it is a quiet generation. And when Dave Rennie comes out and talks about decision-making, we ran when we should have kicked. We kicked when we should have ran. Like the Noah cross kick to Kellaway, for mine, is a perfect example. If I'm one of those three guys between him and Kellaway, that picture shows that there's not enough cons, because I tell you what, 5 years ago with different personnel there, you're in no doubt whatsoever that you must pass the ball to the next player outside you.
Is this an innovation coming for rugby where they're going to communicate via text message during the game?
Don't give Rassie any ideas, boys. Don't. Put the earpiece in.
Is that something you've noticed as well? Is that something you've noticed, the difference in the chatter between sides?
Yeah, I think so. And communication's a skill as well. It's a habit. And I think we're not. It's a generalisation. I'm sure in pockets there is good coaching going on, but I think we're too structured in our approach to coaching, and I think it takes away the ability of players to they rely on being told what to do or working to a plan versus making decisions for themselves, looking what's on and communicating that amongst themselves. And the other thing is, like, all coaches, I found in France actually, and Mulgi coached in France too before coming back here, and it's frustrating because their whole model was prescriptive. They've got such an abundance of talent there, but their whole model, and what the crowds want to see is they want to see a coach who's the boss. They want to see the boss bawling out someone on the sideline who's made a mistake. They don't want to see that. They wouldn't want to have a Wayne Smith. They wouldn't want to have someone who's actually improving the players for the long term. So I found it was tough in France. Luckily, we had a young group, but it was tough in France. You cannot coach them all the way through the week, telling them what to do at training, and then expect them to make decisions in a game. So decision-making is a habit and communication is a habit. And it's very easy to say we need good communication, but it's not as easy, or it's not as obvious, people saying, what is good communication? This is what it is. Now, the things that make up good communication, and you can take this right from kids, and it's basic stuff. And you say to them, what might help this player give you the ball? What might help about communication? Do you want to be loud or quiet? Well, you want to be fucking loud. Do people respond better to their names, or just, hey, hey, hey? Okay. Is it better for you to talk to them from early, well before they get the ball, or just when they get the ball? And so straight away, you've got kids going, talk early, talk loud, use names. The other thing you add in there is, if you've got time, is be specific, not just yeah, but I'm flat, or I'm deep, I'm close, or I'm wide. So if you work on those principles and get those habits built up, and I took French kids who were 19, 20 years old and had to try and teach them habits about communication, where, you got little drills where you got the halfback standing there. He's not allowed to look, and you run the whole team through, because it's not just the playmaker, it's the whole fucking team needs to. And the halfback's not allowed to look, and he's not allowed to pass you the ball unless you use his name and you're shouting out and you tell him where you are and how deep you are. And so you get the whole team running through, and it's a great drill for halfbacks because they've got to pass unseen. And it's great for all the players because they've got to start. And I'll say to them at trainings, especially when there are other teams, might be a club training with, and I'm not saying I'm any excellent coach or anything like that, but I know how to talk. So you say to kids at training, you shout so that the whole field can hear you. And other teams look over, and kids going, oh, and you go, you know what? I don't care. I'm not ashamed. I'll shout out, yada, da, 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 da. But if I ask you to tell me where I am, you'll know because you can hear me. And so, saying good communication means nothing. Go out there, guys. Let's have good communication today. What does that mean? So, and it's a habit, and it is one that New Zealand is better at. It's one of their basics they're always working on. They're working on drills of how to communicate efficiently, how to hear, and how to register, as well as it's a basic skill that they use. And, it's something that they always work on because you can never be there. There's always work to be done on it, same as catching and passing.
Look, it's great advice, and a lot of our Masters players are coaches as well. They do a lot with the juniors, so I think that's some great advice for them to bring that into the game here. Just looking at time and looking at what's coming ahead, Morgs, for the Wallabies, it's a difficult couple of weeks coming ahead. How does Rennie, bring this team up for a game against the world champions, the Springboks? Because at times the Wallabies show that they've got the talent, they've got the ability. Clearly a frustrated side at times. How's Rennie going to get these guys up for a game against the world champs? Communication, I think, Mehrtens, is how he's going to do it.
I would be saying, if I was Rennie, concentrate on our performance. Let the result take care of itself, okay? Yes, we want to win, of course. That's why we're doing what we're doing. That's why we're training every day. That's why we're turning up, motivating one another to play in the weekend. But let's concentrate on what we can control, which is our own performance. We know what the South Africans are going to do. We've got to try and be better and move the ball around them, because they're going to come flying up and try and knock us over, play a physical game. We've got to have accuracy. So accuracy is one of our things, moving the ball into space, trying to do what we want to do. And let's judge ourselves based on that. And don't worry, listen to it. And every time you hear criticism coming, it's because people are engaged. It's because people want you to do well. But within our group, if we can have complete honesty, you have a loss, but you can still say, shit, we did well in these parts of the games. And let's keep doing, we've set our standard there. Sorry, Morgs.
Yeah, did you catch the question there, Morgs?
Yeah, I did. I don't know what's going on. My Wi-Fi is actually good. I don't know. The kids must be streaming something. Hopefully it's on stand. And minutes that I can keep getting paid. I think it's just really interesting as a challenge to play a different type of rugby. All we hear is that if Springboks have picked their team, it's a physical team, great experience in the forward pack, 6-2 bench. If they're smart, they'll just try and bash Australia into submission. Where they've got into trouble yet, Springboks, look at their record on the Eastern Seaboard in Australia. It's really poor. And sometimes they get sucked into one, we know they're a different beast at home. But sometimes they get sucked into playing a little bit against Australia. If they're smart and play to their strengths, it's going to be hard for the Wallabies to be able to survive through that physicality. And the danger too will be if they have a high kick ratio to the box and Australia can't run it back, it's just playing into the box hand. So it's as much because it is physical. The physical challenge must be met to the best of their ability. If they can survive that, and look, let's be real about this. The scrum's probably as good as it's been in a decade for Australia.
Yeah.
You would think Tupou has to start. There's no point waiting to the last 20, as has been done the last few weeks, for the game to be over. So this set piece will be as good as it's been in a long time. They're playing in a place that they have confidence. Look, it's hard to be confident all off the back of what we've seen thus far, but it'll be interesting to see how they can play the game that gives them a chance. Is it just that they're going to just concede physically the whole game and it's not going to matter? Or will they be able to find some chinks in playing high-tempo rugby? The danger there is All Blacks absolutely murdered Australia at the breakdown on the weekend. If they do that again, then Australia's not in the hunt.
But it's a good opportunity.
Sorry, I was just thinking, as a baseline, you can't fault their commitment in the Wallabies. You can't fault their heart. It's like watching the Force a lot of the times this year. That they were a mixed group come together, but what they showed was heart, and that's invaluable as well. Yes, you need the skill. Yes, you need the brains and stuff like that. And that's where they haven't been as good as the New Zealanders at the moment with their skills, particularly things like guys in the wrong position. And I mentioned it in the commentary, once you get going forward, if you get Karevi going over the advantage line first phase, who's the next runner that you want? You want someone who can fucking run. You want an Angus Bell if he's on, or you want a Lockie Swinton winding up and going at the backs as quick as he can. You don't throw it, all due respect to him, you don't throw it to a Matt Phillip. Slow twitch. If you've got forwards in front of you, it's static, and you just want to set another phase to get defenders sucked in, you give it to a Matt Phillip. You don't throw it to you don't throw it to a Michael Hooper in that situation. Goodness knows he'll probably make the best of it, but use your horses for courses. Now, Matt Phillips, same thing in that distribution role. He's getting calls from outside, which is a good sign, but he doesn't have the skill to get the ball out there efficiently. So they're trying. I think they've got heart. Michael Hooper personifies it. I don't think they're lacking in commitment, which I think is a really good baseline to have, because you know, you can have all the skill in the world. If you don't have the guts, then you won't go very well. So, you know, I think, and they will find it different against South Africa. I think they'll find it a simpler game. It might be hard at times to move the ball with that ferocious defence, but, you know, at the same time, the All Blacks don't come up slowly either. So,
does the pressure come off? Because everyone's written them off, right? I mean, there's no pressure on them, right? So that gives them a great opportunity to just play their natural game, as you talked about. Does that, for me, I think that's the opportunity, right? Even if they don't win, as long as they maintain that heart and that commitment and they build on what they've already done over the last few weeks, that sets them up to be a very dangerous side come the World Cup, don't you think?
I hope so, because there's a lot of growing to go. But I'm keen to hear Morgs on because I don't know what KPIs are like for coaches. I mean, obviously there's a results thing, but there's also, you know, is the team improving? And it's hard to judge when you're playing the All Blacks so regularly at the moment, you know? So, I don't know,
that's a good point,
What kind of KPIs look like?
Well, I suppose there's two levels of KPIs. There's the ones against New Zealand and South Africa, and then there's the rest. I think we'll learn more from playing Argentina and then the UK tour. And the information is that we will play Japan. The Wallabies will play Japan on the way up to spring tour as well. So, you know, you're almost on a hiding to nothing these days if you're comparing it with New Zealand and South Africa at the moment. I just find it interesting when look, it hurts me a little bit that you're being almost patronising as great All Black supporters, but you're also being kind to the Wallabies in that you're saying that there's effort and this and that. Well, so there should be. Well, that's the minimum. That's the minimum of playing for Harlequins versus Endeavour. Like, you're asking for the same commitment. It doesn't take anything to give commitment and give your all. That's the minimum standard. Yes, they are doing it, and that is great. But this is a Wallabies team. And so the great question that we didn't get to in a second before was about the silly mistakes and crucial moment, I think, from James Rice. And I think the crucial thing for me is that those are forced errors. They may not look obviously like them, but it's from the All Blacks are just an examination of every part of your game. The All Blacks can play every style of rugby required. The Box are probably the best at their style. New Zealand are still very good at playing lots of different styles, and it's an examination of every part of your game, of every contest. Rugby, what I love about rugby is that every action is a contest, and New Zealand are great at making every contest an examination of your skill level, your fitness, your cohesion with your teammates. Everything about your game is always under duress, and that's where those mistakes are coming. Now, there'll be some times where the Springboks probably put more pressure on elements of the Wallabies game, but I do think there will be other times where they don't. They've got a hard-working back row that chase the ball all around the field. If the Wallabies are smart, there are significant opportunities bouncing back, changing direction and creating confusion. Whether they're good enough to do that and whether it will be more about the All Blacks being able to exploit those things in the weeks to come, we don't know. But it is a different examination that they'll have this weekend, the Wallabies.
But it is a great opportunity, and yes, I'm a hardcore one-eyed Cantabrian All Black supporter through and through, even though I've lived in Australia more than I have in New Zealand. But I think, most Kiwi supporters and All Black supporters would say, without a strong Wallaby team, a competitive Wallaby team, rugby's dying. So looking at the effort that the Wallabies are putting in, the fact that they come home strong and all those things you talked about, I think we've still got some excitement, and we're all looking forward to that contest on the weekend to see how those two teams shape up. And then that lays us a foundation for in a couple of weeks when the All Blacks take on South Africa for that 100th test, which I guess a lot of the New Zealand media are sort of putting a lot of pressure on the All Blacks to say, well, this is going to be your benchmark. These are the world champions. What are your thoughts on that game that's coming up?
Well, I can't wait for the whole 4 weeks, but it's good because there's been a lot of in the 2 years since the World Cup, there's been a lot of chat firing back and forth, and South Africans say, well, you guys couldn't even beat England, they belted you, and then we belted them, and New Zealanders say, well, we beat you in the World Cup, you haven't beaten, you didn't beat us there, so blah blah blah. Oh, it'll just be good to see them on the field. It's an incredible rivalry. I don't know what the stats are. I think the All Blacks now are slightly above 50% rate, particularly since sort of 92 when they came back in. So I don't know. I'd actually try not to overanalyze too much. It's going to be interesting to see what style the South Africans play, because they knew they could play a pretty limiting style against the Lions, because Lions were big and physical. They actually played the better rugby of that series, but they just didn't have the skill to get the ball into space and have it stick the passing, whereas the All Blacks can. But the All Blacks, you'd have to say, maybe not quite as physically strong as the Lions. So don't know whether, just be really interesting to see, to be honest. And I go into these games and love commentating the games and love trying to make analysis during the game, but I'm also loving it as a fan. Like we're sitting there, unfortunately we're not going to be up in Queensland. We're watching it on a screen. We're having our dream as well, as rugby fans. So I think it's fantastic. As an aside, I'd love to see this happen in between World Cup years, is have one country host, like a Euro in football, host in one country the entire tournament. Now, if we add Japan on, if the United States gets to a point where, you might get 6 or 8 teams having a mini World Cup every 4 years as well, 2 years, halfway between World Cups in one country. How fantastic. Like, imagine if Australia had been open. I mean, if Australia had been opened up and the world had been opened up, we wouldn't have this. But I think it makes sense, like we had last year, to have it all hosted in one country. So I just think it's fantastic. I'm looking forward to it as well. The All Blacks have got a lot to prove. What we know about the All Blacks is they can probably put 3 teams of quite equal ability together, but it's still going to be the very top team that is tested, the one that you would play in your World Cup final. And so is our top team up to beating South Africa? We can play them a lot and play pretty consistent rugby and hope to have a lot of good wins. But, if they're fired up the box, are we going to beat them? I see Rob's question there was interesting about coaches pulling players. I think the interesting thing about coaching these days, and again, Morgs has coached more recently than I will, so can comment on it, but I feel like it's approaching the game as a 23 squad, and quite often they've made decisions about how they want to finish a game and then work backwards from there. So if we want to finish the game with these 15 players on the park, which 15 players do we start with to be able to merge that entire 23? And there's really, do you want to have a player who's still going well, then maybe tapers off because he's put so much effort in? Is it then too late to replace him? Could he have already made, one error that leads to a game-changing try? So I think they really work to try and optimise the entire 23, which I think is fair. So sometimes it looks like, gee, this player's going well. Why the hell would they bring him off? So I guess that's the plan that they're playing to. Morgs, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think these days they're going with a plan. So, you think, okay, Taniela Tupou, 50 on the bench behind Alan Alalatoa. About 55 minutes we're planning, and then you do need to judge it as you're going along. You've got the S&C guy there with some metrics around fatigue and things like that, and we're not as far down the road as AFL in that regard, but that sometimes adds to the decision making. In coaching groups I've been involved in, often it was righto. We're going well or we're not going well, we're losing, we need to do something. Who will make a difference? Who can make a difference? I actually think, looking at last week as just an example, I thought the Wallabies waited too long to make replacements. If you look at it, between the 40th and 55th minute, they were cooked physically. They were struggling and needed enforcement. They waited a little bit long there, but I never like seeing a player in form playing well taken off. I don't like seeing backs replaced at all, really, if they're playing well. I'm not for giving guys a go just because the 23 guys need to get on the field.
So, Morgs, who's the player to watch for us? Who's the Wallaby player that we should be watching on the weekend against the Box?
Well, if it's Quade, everything's going to revolve around him if he does get picked. And don't forget, it's a different Quade. He might be a yard slower and the razzle-dazzle of youth might be gone, but he's a much more complete, settled human being. And with O'Connor not quite right, so O'Connor wasn't really available for selection is my info. Look, I think the team will get put out tomorrow, but this is what I think might happen. O'Connor's maybe not quite ready. He's the one I'd pick. Noah has had an opportunity. He's not quite there. He is a player for the future. There are some young players in Sydney that for different reasons around quarantine couldn't be part of the squad for extended period. So Quade coming in was almost an accident of geography to some degree. He was in southeastern Queensland. And I think this is a bridging moment. If O'Connor was ready to go, he'd be in there. He's going to be the one going forward. But Quade, we know how influential he is, so everything will revolve around him. And for him to be anywhere in the fight, collectively, the 8 forwards and especially the back row, need to be in the fight. If Swinton gets another opportunity, if Valentini gets an opportunity, will we see a Wilson off the bench? Does Rodder probably start? I know Dave Rennie mentioned that Luke Salakailota won't take any further part in TRC because he's back in Sydney for the birth of a child, so there'll be differences there. He's not coming back in. The physical battle first, and then what can Quade not just conjure as the magician we know he is, but can he manage the game? Can he make good decisions under pressure, which are more, the Quade Cooper of now should be better off doing than ever before.
Mertz, who's the guy to watch from your perspective?
Don't know. I mean, I think it shows how poor our stocks are here at fly half that Cooper's even in the conversation. I mean, you think he last played in 2017. Personally, I've got no expectations of him. I think it's a massive ask. If he can deliver, if he was playing and he can deliver a reasonable performance, I think that's an achievement. I wouldn't be hoping for much from him at all. I think Lolesio, I think the likelihood is, I mean, if they were flush with options, he would have had a break. Whether or not it went amazingly or not, he'd have had a break just for the mental break. You look at the All Blacks, how they rotate their players and stuff as well. So I think Rennie getting alongside Lolesio and just saying, you're my guy. For the future, you're my guy. No matter what happens, you're my guy. And everything I'm doing is around optimizing what you can do as a player. Yes, I'll be honest with you. I'll say where you need to improve. I'll say where you're going well. But just know you're my guy. I had that. I was lucky enough when I was 20 years old, played for a club team in Christchurch. It was my first season at Senior A. I'd played most of the previous season Senior B, got a couple of games. And then a bloke called Steve Hansen came along to coach the old boys club team. And he took me around to his place one day, made me do a bit of a working bee. I think it was just the exercise to see whether I was a hard worker or not, which I could tell you I wasn't. I could have told him at the start I wasn't. But anyway, there are two of us, actually, the young 9 and the young 10, and he's taken us each aside at different times of the day and had a cup of tea. And he just said to me, he said, you're going to be my guy at number 10. I don't expect you to get everything right, but just know that I will back you. You got some old guys in the forward pack. They want you to tell them what to do. So just do it. You won't always be right, but I will crawl over broken glass for you. And the difference that made for a young 10, not feeling like, I could be flippant about making mistakes or whatever, but just knowing, what, overall, I've got someone who's got my back. He believes in me, and he knows that not everything's going to go perfectly. So I sincerely hope, and I suspect as a similar sort of person, Rennie will be doing that with Lolesio. Like I say, anything we get out of Quade, to be honest, is a bonus. And it's really sad that the stocks are like this. I don't know, is Turinui not available? I've always seen him as a 12, not a 10, but a guy who can play 10 at a pinch. Hodge can play at a pinch, but he's not really a hold his position down in any position. One of those guys really committed, really nice bloke, really, hard trainer and good work ethic and everything like that, thumping boot. Has he got an actual good position? Probably not. So I just think it's sad that the 10s are in this state in Australia.
Mate,
sorry, Turinui, I think he's out injured. He got injured last week. I don't think he's available for selection. And I agree with you around Hodgie. We might see him at 15. I think it's actually an indictment. The fact that the indictment on the high performance plan or lack thereof that we've had to go to Quade, it just shows some of the work being done by those people in charge of high performance in providing players, retaining players, developing players. There has been asleep at the wheel. For Quade individually, I love Quade. He's a good mate of mine. I love playing footy with him. Mate, I hope he does well. Fully support him as an individual. But the situation where you have to bring a guy in who's coming out of second division in Japan and was deemed superfluous years ago, and even bring Greg Holmes in late 30s, it would almost seem like an accident. Oh, why don't you just come and train with the Wallabies? Like he ran to Dave Rennie and said, "Oh, can I come and watch some of the sessions? I'm transitioning into coaching." And now he's training with the Wallabies. And yes, COVID is a great excuse, but if I'm the head of high performance in Rugby Australia, I'd expect a better job than what's being done at the moment.
Yeah, so great impersonation of Steve Hansen there, Mertz. That's exactly what it sounds like. But it is a really important thing here in Australia, is that if you look at comparing to other nations, and New Zealand is the closest neighbour, but some of the other top tier nations also have depth in each of those positions. And we saw in the World Cup with Carter when he went down, with Donald comes out of fishing to kick a winner for a World Cup. You have to have depth in some of those key positions. And the fact that and I agree with you, Morgan, that Cooper has evolved into being a very well-rounded individual, and if you put him on the paddock, he's going to give us all, that. But that says a lot about the depth that Australia has in a very pivotal position. So what is the backup plan going to 23 if you've just got Lolesio and you've got people like Hodge and Tamua? Who else have you got? Who's coming through the ranks?
O'Connor will be number one to the World Cup, and then Noah will probably be the backup. And I'd say that Harrison, Donaldson, those sorts of guys will get their opportunity. Noah's great advantage is obviously playing behind that Brumbies pack week in, week out, and Donaldson and Harrison have to deal with what the Waratahs are doing, and they probably won't be much better next year. Carter Gordon looks good. So it's that paying the price now for the period where I think 3 of the 4 10s or 4 of the 5 or something like that, 3 of the 5 10s in Super Rugby a few years ago were all foreigners. So the price is being paid now. There is a great young generation, but they're just that. They're young kids. They should be making their mistakes at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon in club footy and at 7:30 earlier in the year in Super Rugby. Noah should be coming off the bench for 20 minutes at the back of a test, if anything, not starting. And you know what? This gets into the systemic problems within rugby in Australia, which probably cannot be solved unless we win the rights to the World Cup in 2027, and there's that injection of funds. There has to be a bridge to there with 23 in France, with 25 Lions and things like that. But the last great opportunity for rugby in Australia is that 27 World Cup. How we survive, excel, and develop through into that, that's a tough question.
Look, that's a really good segue, Morgan. What can we as a rugby community in Vic Masters and the Rugby Alliance across the country, what can we do to support that bid for 27?
Yeah, I think there's some nuts and bolts stuff around getting your club to send a letter of support. They were spruiking 50,000 signatures or something. Truthfully, if we're fair dinkum, we should be 1 million. It should be, Vic Masters should be telling your AFL mates, mate, how good was it in 2003 when you could go to Derby Day on the Saturday and then go and watch the Wallabies play Ireland that night at the old Etihad, I think it was, whatever it was called back then. So it's not just about rugby people. We've got to drag Australians into this if we're fair dinkum about pushing this. The people on here, the Vic Masters crew, you guys do it. You guys are in a position where you can spend your money supporting rugby. You can help your club. You just got to keep doing what you're doing. People talk about more investment in grassroots, and that's definitely true. But I tell you what, the grassroots do what they can with what they have. I've seen it done in Melbourne in club footy. I see it week in, week out in Sydney in club footy. I see it done with my kids playing village clubs, as they call it in Sydney. Mums and dads roll their sleeves up and do what needs to be done, and that'll always be part of it. Injection of money is helpful. But rugby doesn't need the Wallabies. Rugby doesn't need Rugby Australia. Rugby is a great sport itself. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep passing on your love for this sport to your kids and your grandkids and keep that going, I think is a great thing. And then where you can push and help with 2027, that'll be that huge opportunity, as I mentioned.
Yeah, look, there's always flow-on benefits to those that are listening from New Zealand and parts of Asia as well. And so I guess we just encourage everyone that is listening that we'll try and put up some of that information on our Facebook page. And,
I'll flick some of that stuff through, yeah.
Yeah, and circulate it.
Point from Morgs, though, is getting other sports, just getting Australians involved and just showing the nation's support for it. As I understand it, Guernsey's working through, rather than it being a bid process where they've got 2 to choose from in May next year, they're trying to work on the principle that let's just get it assigned early, like the 2032 Olympic Games were in Brisbane. And I think getting United States on side to say, hey, look, why don't we go in together? We'll take 27, you take 31, and World Rugby can just say, boom, boom, and build it from now. It's got to go to the States at some point. We know that. It will have been 3 in a row in the Northern Hemisphere. So it's right that it does come to the Southern Hemisphere again. So Aussie's well placed for that. But I think just getting the United States on side as potentially like a joint bid to say us, then United, us, then us. That's the key now. And I think it strengthens Guernsey's case in negotiating directly with World Rugby about saying just like forget the bid process, let's just assign it. if there's that swell of support. And he's already got a bit of a juggle on his hands by the sounds of it, because every premier wants to have the final in their state. So I guess some sort of, and I think it's also what rugby in Australia needs a little bit is, yes, we all want to do well in our different patch within the sport, but even more importantly is that the sport does well, and let's just kind of all work for the greater good. And then we'll all hopefully benefit from that in our little patches. So,
yes, I think MCG will be one of the 3 possible venues for the final. So the Vic government, it'll be a big bidding process, but it'll be Sydney, Perth, or Melbourne are the ones big enough to host the final. So it could be anything.
Not be Australia by then, mate. It could be a republic.
They might cede from the union. We might not be allowed in there by then. Still, Mertz.
50 billion surplus. I think they could probably go alone. But hey, look, there was a question that we started to talk about when you lost your NBN, Morgs, was around player welfare, and we talked about the head injury assessment process, and that on the weekend there were a couple of All Blacks that went off with HIA and Taylor and Severe, and they didn't return. Do you think we've got player welfare right with the way that they're approaching some of that head injury assessment process?
I think we're doing a lot right. So you look at the Cody Taylor situation. I'm not sure what view everyone had, but Mertz and I in the Combox have a few different camera angles. At the moment, it's really important for me that medical staff and on-field staff are helping the players protect themselves. We've all been there. You get a head knock and you're trying to push the physio away because your first instinct is get back in the line, get back in the line. I think it's really important that players, when injured, at the moment, the medical staff have just got to keep them out of play. I'm not sure who it was, but I was watching. I could see Cody Taylor was in a great way, and the medical staff are really trying to keep him out. And in the end, let him get back in the game to protect the player. What I really don't want is a guy who's had a head knock, gets another one, trying to be brave, and it's hard. It's a combat sport. It's not even a contact sport. It's a combat sport, rugby. And, we talk about male bravado and the masculinity of rugby. It's get back in the line with you, mate. I've been in a coach's box myself, and you can't help it when a player goes down. Get him on his feet. Get him back in the line. We need him. But player welfare is evolving well, and more of the people involved in the game at all levels, not just professionally, are very much more aware of it. Like, I tell people stories of when we used to do it. We had a cog sport test where you'd press buttons on a computer when a red or black card flipped around, or you had to pick the suit, and you would do a baseline at the start of the season. And I would do it deliberately poorly so that my baseline was really low, so that when I got a head knock, it was easier to qualify. You don't want to give up your spot to someone else. That's how stupid we were back then. And I genuinely had Sharon Flyhoff, who's now helping with the Wallabies. His doctor was the TARS doctor for many years. A few times I did the cog sport test to return to play, and she said, "You've improved. You've had a head knock, and you've gotten better." Well, but that's the mindset. I didn't want to give up my spot to anyone. It didn't matter. So athletes are much more aware of it. People around the game are much more aware of it. I think we're doing a lot right. The next big one is probably the tackle, the tackle, the ruck at the ground, the challenge. When you look at the way guys are at the ball, and this is Mertz's big one, so I might try and tee him up to have a crack here, but guys challenging the ball are in a really vulnerable position. There might be a way we have to change the way people challenge in that jackal position, because the only true target sometimes when guys are over the ball is the head. It's almost impossible to legally move some guys these days without either coming in the side or targeting them in dangerous ways. I think the tackle, lots of great things have been done. The head injury assessment's great. The way it flows down through our game, it's up to us as parents too to not shake off a little knock that our kid gets and go, "Oh, you don't need 3 weeks," or whatever it is. You'll be right, son. Toughen up, and I'm bad. I'm really bad at that. Come on, mate, get up. It's archaic now. So I think it's as good as it's ever been, with the possibility to get better. Mertz, I'm interested in your comments on the breakdown.
They never would have won 99 if Blackout hadn't charged into that ruck and you got the opportunity for the kick, right, Mertz?
I can't even remember, and I haven't even had any head knocks. I never had one.
No, well, you didn't get the head knock, but it was the contest at the breakdown where Blackouter came charging in, where you thought you might have lost. That ruck was almost going the way of South Africa, and that would have been the game. But him flying into that ruck was what led the referee to give it to Canterbury, which gave you the opportunity for the kick to win that game. But
you're trying to give Blackadder the credit for my drop kick for once in my life. Got a drop kick through.
Absolutely. Well, when it comes to head injury assessment, look, there's a lot of players that are sort of putting their hand up and donating their brains to science to look at the effects of long-term concussion. But as a player that sort of avoided contact, are you going to donate your brain to science as a comparative control?
Yeah, and I expect it back as well. I think they'll look at it and hand it back immediately. I mean, you can speak for yourself on the wanting to get back in the line, Morgan. If I was down and medical team was coming on to me, I was asking for a Happy Meal. I'm taking a break.
No, Mertz, that's not true, Mertz. You say it because it's funny, but mate, don't sell yourself short.
I was never part of that defensive line anyway. Actually, Blackadder is a very good mate of mine from back in the day. One of the great leadership quotes of history, really, when you think about Martin Luther King and JFK and all those sort of ones. And just before I did that drop goal in Pretoria and pulled the fingers, he saw us all debating what to do because I didn't want to take a drop goal because I wanted some other bugger to be to blame for losing. And he just was about to put his head back in the scrum and he just looked around at us all having a committee meeting in his backs and he goes, just fucking do something. And that was it. And then the other one I liked from Toddy was when he was coaching the Crusaders and I was doing a little bit of work with the kickers at the Waratahs and they, of course, played the final here. And the Bernard Foley kicked the goal. They had a win. Later on that night, I sent a message to all the Crusaders coaches just saying, heads up, guys, you had a great season and nothing to be ashamed of and blah, blah, blah. And Aaron Major and Tumbai Matson both replied almost straight away at midnight. And Blackadder, who's a great mate of mine, he replied at 4 a.m. So I think a few whiskeys deep. And all I got, and I've still got the message that said, you know what, fuck off. And bless him too, because a few weeks later he said to me, he sent me a message saying, hey, mate, I've just looked back at my messages and I saw there was one that was supposed to go to another Andrew that I know in Hamilton or something. So, sorry, mate. And I'm like, mate, at least own it. I don't care. Anyway, what was the question?
No, it's an interesting one. So, Morgs, what sort of inspirational messages did you get from some of the leaders that you were surrounded by in your playing days? Anything that comes to mind?
No, we're very much, especially with Greaves, he's very much process. He was very, very much around objective process stuff, knowing your role, knowing the calls. It was, if we get turned over, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then you could do whatever you wanted in terms of unstructured play within the system. But he was very big on knowledge and process. That was just the way that Wallaby group was. There wasn't a huge amount of fire and brimstone. Then you go to France and it's the opposite, where guys are crying, do it for the village, do it for the president, do it for the fact that if we don't win, we're going to not get paid on Monday. So it was interesting to get that to that other side of it. Look, truthfully, in Wallaby change rooms, it was never really like that. It was very much about individual preparation, execution, doing your job.
So how did you prepare for a game? Did you have any, there's some reports about you being a little bit superstitious about having particularly some of your Kiwi family at games, but did you have any sort of superstitions or traditions that you used to do in preparation for a game?
No, not really. Obviously, a lot of it was night games, and we played on Saturdays. So from midday till 6, you'd normally find me on the punt somewhere. That's the way I relaxed, on a Saturday. And there was a big crew of us. There was Todd Ikefu, Owen Finnegan, all of us taking our mind off it and relaxing it in that way.
And Mertz, aside from a bit of rouge that you put on your cheeks before a game, what were some of the traditions that you might have had?
Well, I was pretty loose with my preparation. It probably didn't look it on the field. A lot of people always said I look so serious and worried on the field, and my answer was, well, there were some big guys running around and I wasn't very big. But I think I like to be relaxed. I like to be the last one back in the change room. I love the atmosphere of being out there, so I love walking around the ground and not having too much time cooped up in the change rooms. And also I realised that I shouldn't be around guys who needed to focus for a physical battle coming up. I was the worst person to have next to you if you're trying to, build yourself up to a really physical battle. So I'd stay out as long as possible. And actually going back to Wayne Smith, who was coaching the Crusaders in the late 90s, we got a beautiful bloke came down from the back blocks of North Auckland, way up north, called Norm Berryman. And he came down. I'd played a bit of junior rugby with him. He was a beautiful centre winger, really skillful, like amazing touch player and stuff like that, and a really gregarious, lovely character. And we played our pre-season across in Noosa, and it was really loose. Like we had a pre-season game against the Blues. Norm had just got down to the Crusaders team, and Wayne Smith was running the team, and we were relaxed. We were really cruisy, and we had this game against the Blues. They biked down to the ground at Noosa, and I think we might have walked from our units, and we were playing with 40 players, and it was the loosest build-up ever. It was just, basically almost a game of touch. And Wayne Smith said to Norm Berryman in his first experience with the Crusaders afterwards, he said, how did you find that, Norm? And Normie said, to tell you the truth, Smithy, I found the build-up a little bit intense. And Smithy started laughing, thinking he was being sarcastic. And he sort of, and then he realised, no, he's being serious. He found that an intense build-up. It was the loosest ever. And Smithy said, right, okay, no worries, Norm. He said, right, if you found that one loose, you might struggle, with a bit more intensity during the season. So what you need to do before the game is just get away from everyone else, fuck off and go find the idiots. So if you can find Con Barrel, who was an idiot and fantastic, awesome prop from up in North Auckland as well, go and spend time with idiot Mehrtens. Just go out and hang out with them before the game. Come back into the sheds, just get your gear on and get straight back out on the field. If that's what you need to do, then go and do it. So that was pretty much our little build-up. Norm Berryman and I would walk around the field with Con, if he was there as well, to the point where we played a game against the Sharks in 98, and we had to win that game to make the semis, and we ultimately did over in Durban. And we're walking around the ground doing our thing. It was getting a bit late. We were probably almost, cutting the time short to even get our gear on. And there were people came down and were saying g'day at the hoardings and said to us, do you want to come in for a beer? Berryman was over the fence and into their box at ground level before I could stop him. So I had to jump in and go over and try and say, look, we probably better get out of here. We'll see you afterwards, though. So.
Yeah, beautiful, man. Great story. Hey, gents, it's just looking at the time. Look, we've got thousands of other questions. We could talk all night. But look, really appreciate that you've taken your time, that's valuable time, and we do value that, to talk to us, the Vic Masters, and other rugby players from across Australia and across the ditch. Lovely to hear some of your insights. And look, the call that you guys are giving through Stan, look, we can see what you're building there. It's actually really quite refreshing to see what you're doing. It looks like you're having a bit of fun along the way. We really look forward to the call this weekend and the follow-up games. But more importantly, Morgs, we want to see the Classic Wallabies in Victoria. We want to see a Stan Sport Classic Wallabies Vic Masters game somewhere in regional Victoria. McArdle's champing at the bit for a run. We know that. And so we look forward to seeing you here in person and have a read together and talk a bit more about rugby. So thanks, gents.
I'll let Morgan have the last word. So I'll just say thank you. The cool thing about rugby is what everyone talks about is the camaraderie, and that's what they love, whether it's in the United States or whether it's in Italy and stuff like that. It's just something different about it. So, thanks for the chance to be on here and be part of your guys' network, and hope we can join you again. Morgs, yours.
Thanks, Matt.
No, thanks for having us. And as long as Mehrtens plays 10, we're coming.
Sounds great. Look forward to
it. Is it purple? Is it gold shorts? Is gold shorts the best pair for him to wear? What colour's the best?
We'll
find something.
The statistics, their yards come straight into this channel.
Yeah, look, especially in regional Victoria, we know how tough it's been. We've almost forgotten about the bushflyer influence, and now that COVID's hit. So, mate, there's a real commitment with Classics. We'll be down. We'll do something big. Let's play a game. Let's have some fun. So, thanks very much. I've obviously met a lot of the guys from Vic Masters over my time in Melbourne. You guys are a great organisation. So, keep doing what you guys are doing. I like watching from afar. I do laugh at how serious some of the matches become. I often used to see Mark Lewillier after playing for Quins in the Masters the next day. He could hardly walk, but he had the biggest grin of all time on his face. I don't know how he did it, but he keeps doing it. So, no, thanks for all that. And just with the comms, I think Mehrtens and I are the same. Like we find it quite humbling and a great responsibility to be one of those few voices to be able to bring the game in Australia to people. We're loving doing it. Hopefully people are enjoying Stan doing it a little bit differently to the way it's been done before, and hopefully we can do even more in the years to come, right throughout the game around the country. So thanks very much, guys, for having us on. It was great fun.
We love it. Thanks very much. Over to you, Brendan.
No, thanks, guys, so much. This has been amazing. All we asked for you was an hour, and we've got nearly an hour 50, and we could have kept chatting. This has been amazing. You've given us an opportunity to break away from the monotony that is lockdown, and just seeing all the chats coming through. You've really brightened up our day. So thanks so much. And what I'd say is Morgan, we are, I'll see if I can bring this up. Morgan is doing a challenge, so I will be sharing this later on the Vic Masters page. Please jump in and donate to Morgan. He's walking for the kids in cancer, which is an amazing cause. Already halfway through the month, and you're already smashing it, mate. So maybe.
Yeah, well, my wife's waking me up at 5:30 in the morning to go out running and walking with her. So I've got a hard trainer, and that's for kids cancer research. So I think Owen Finnegan's the CEO of Kids Cancer Project. So it's 90 kids in the month of September will be diagnosed with a childhood cancer. So it's a pretty bloody good cause. And, we talked about Are You OK? And Mehrtens, you referenced some of us, our families are healthy. We're together. We're looking to get through to the other side. And the other side for me is to come down to Victoria at a few Melbourne Rebels Super Games with Mehrtens, and we'll share a beer with you guys face to face. Thanks very much.
Can't wait, guys. And thanks so much. And yeah, amazing work you're doing with Stan, and also the additional content you're bringing through, like leading into the Bleeders. I watched the Queensland State Cup, was awesome, and stuff you're pulling through from New Zealand. So keep up the great work, guys. And the only other thing I'll add is around we'll do as much as we can to drum up support the World Cup, because one thing we've lost in Victoria is that mantle of the sporting capital of the world, and we need to get it back, and we need to get. The AFL's lost their grand final 2 years in a row. We need to get those guys to support. And how do we aim big and get that World Cup final here in Melbourne? So, Masters, everyone, stay safe, stay sane, connected. Morgs, Mehrtens, thank you so much. Carl, I know you loved it. I loved all the research, but doing all this. But thanks, guys. Look forward to the next one. Thank you.
Pleasure, guys.